story introduces Ellie Mitchell, a former ER nurse turned barber in the small town of Millfield. A reclusive, troubled veteran named Todd Whitman brings his 8-year-old son, Ethan, in for a haircut. While cutting the boy's matted hair, Ellie discovers a severe, alarming skin condition on his scalp that is clearly not a simple rash. Her nursing instincts kick in, and she is horrified by what she sees. The narrative establishes a tense atmosphere, suggesting a case of potential child neglect. The town's police chief, Jack Donovan, who has been keeping a watchful eye on the isolated family, is alerted as Ellie reaches for the phone, setting the stage for an intervention. The story focuses on themes of hidden suffering, a community's responsibility, and the scars of trauma. The story reaches its climax in the barbershop. Ellie discovers Ethan has a severe, infected scalp condition, not a simple rash. She confronts his father, Todd, a struggling veteran, insisting the boy needs immediate medical attention. Todd resists, citing home remedies and a distrust of doctors. The tension escalates when town elder Dorothy Wilson arrives and sides with Ellie. As they argue, Ethan's condition rapidly deteriorates. He develops a high fever and begins to have a seizure. The story ends on a critical cliffhanger. Ellie and Dorothy take emergency action, calling 911 as Ethan convulses on the floor, forcing Todd to confront the devastating consequences of his neglect and fear. The narrative highlights themes of parental struggle, community intervention, and the critical need for professional medical care. The story reaches its medical and emotional climax. Ethan is rushed to the hospital in critical condition with a systemic infection caused by severe, long-neglected scalp folliculitis. His father, Todd, finally breaks down, admitting his fear and distrust of doctors stemmed from his own negative experiences with medication after his brother's death. In a tense conference room, the police chief and Ellie confront Todd about his neglect. The doctor confirms the gravity of Ethan's condition, explaining it as a deep bacterial skin infection that has become life-threatening. The narrative shifts from the initial crisis to the consequences of Todd's well-intentioned but dangerously misguided attempts to treat his son himself, highlighting the central conflict between natural remedies and necessary medical intervention. The story reaches a critical point in the hospital. The doctor confirms Ethan's severe infection has likely turned into life-threatening sepsis, caused by prolonged neglect and the unsanitary conditions in the leaky, mold-infested cabin where they lived. Todd admits to struggling with severe, untreated PTSD that prevents him from providing proper care. Child Protective Services is called, and Todd is arrested for child endangerment. The narrative deepens, suggesting Todd's actions were driven by trauma and a desperate, misguided attempt to protect his son from an unknown fate related to a person named James. While the legal and medical systems move against Todd, Ellie begins to suspect the situation is more complex than simple neglect, sensing a deeper tragedy at its core. The story ends with Ethan fighting for his life and authorities searching for other family members. The story focuses on the aftermath of Ethan's hospitalization. Ellie remains at the hospital, keeping vigil over the sedated boy, who is now in the pediatric ICU in critical but stable condition. The doctor reveals the severity of the infection, which required surgery to remove dead tissue, and confirms Ethan is also malnourished and anemic. Ellie is filled with guilt for not recognizing the signs sooner. The narrative confirms that Todd has been arrested on child endangerment charges. The story ends with the arrival of a Child Protective Services worker the next morning, setting the stage for the legal and bureaucratic fallout. While the focus remains on Ethan's fragile fight for survival, the summary highlights themes of guilt, responsibility, and the beginning of a systemic intervention. The story delves into the investigation and its emotional fallout. Ellie is formally interviewed by Child Protective Services, confirming the long-term nature of the neglect. The CPS agent states Ethan will be placed in foster care. Simultaneously, the police investigation reveals Todd's background. He is an Army Ranger veteran with severe, untreated PTSD, triggered by his brother's suicide. He abandoned treatment and went off the grid to protect his son, but his actions led to dangerous neglect. The narrative reaches a critical point when Todd, in a moment of breakthrough during his police interrogation, reveals that Ethan has an aunt, a potential family member who could care for him. This introduces a new possibility for Ethan's future and a key piece of information for the authorities. The summary highlights the themes of trauma, systemic intervention, and a glimmer of hope for familial placement. The story deepens as the investigation progresses. Todd, in police custody, reveals he has a sister, Rebecca, in Vermont, a stable, elementary school teacher who has been searching for them. This offers a potential, safe family placement for Ethan. However, the legal situation escalates. The district attorney is pursuing felony charges against Todd due to the severity of Ethan's condition. Meanwhile, Ellie's perspective shifts from judgment to a more nuanced understanding. A conversation with a semi-conscious Ethan reveals the boy's deep concern for his father's own pain and a belief that he was responsible for the situation. Furthermore, Ellie notices strange, patterned marks on Ethan's scalp that suggest Todd was repeatedly applying a specific home remedy. Driven by this new information, Ellie convinces the police chief to take her to the isolated, squalid cabin where Todd and Ethan lived. The visit confirms the extreme poverty and neglectful conditions but also introduces a new mystery, the nature and purpose of the strange marks, suggesting Todd's actions were part of a desperate, ritualistic attempt to heal his son, complicating the simple narrative of neglect. The summary highlights the evolving themes of trauma, misguided love, and the search for a more complete truth. The story deepens as Ellie and the police chief investigate the cabin. They discover evidence that Todd was not simply neglectful but was actively, though misguidedly, trying to treat Ethan's infection with homemade remedies, as detailed in a family journal. More importantly, they find Todd's own journal entries, which reveal he is suffering from severe, untreated PTSD and paranoid delusions. He believed he was protecting Ethan from a shadowy threat. Explaining his refusal to seek conventional medical help, the narrative shifts from a case of simple neglect to a tragic situation where a father's love and his mental illness became dangerously intertwined. The story ends back at the hospital, where Ethan, comforted by his belongings, asks about his father, highlighting the enduring bond between them even amidst the tragedy. The summary emphasizes the themes of misunderstood mental illness, the failure of systems meant to help veterans, and the complexity of parental love. The story focuses on the emotional aftermath and the arrival of a potential guardian. Ethan reveals the depth of his father's mental illness, explaining that Todd suffered from paranoid delusions about bugs in his head, a condition that led to his brother's suicide. Ethan's heartbreaking confession shows he understood his father was ill and even pretended to share his delusions to make him feel less alone. Ethan's aunt, Rebecca, arrives. She explains that her fight with Todd was over his refusal to get treatment for his severe PTSD, which led to him cutting off contact. The narrative sets the stage for a difficult reunion, as Ethan has been told by his father that Rebecca abandoned them. The summary highlights the tragic misunderstanding and the complex, loving bond between father and son. Even in the midst of severe mental illness, the story reaches a critical turning point. Ethan is emotionally reunited with his aunt, Rebecca, dispelling the lie his father told him that she had abandoned them. This paves the way for her to become his guardian. The legal situation intensifies. Todd faces a serious felony arraignment, but a psychiatric evaluation recommends he be sent to a treatment facility, not jail, due to severe PTSD. The narrative's key revelation comes when Ellie shows the police chief one of Ethan's drawings. She explains that Ethan had a severe lice infestation, which, in Todd's delusional state, he perceived as the same bugs he believed had driven his brother to suicide. This recontextualizes Todd's actions not as simple neglect, but as a desperate, tragically misguided attempt to save his son from a perceived supernatural threat. The summary highlights the themes of misunderstood mental illness and the importance of uncovering the full truth for a just legal outcome. The story reaches its legal and emotional climax. At Todd's arraignment, a crucial fact is revealed. Ethan is not his son, but his nephew, whom he adopted after his brother's suicide. This deepens the tragedy, showing Todd was trying to honor a promise to his late brother. The judge remands Todd to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation, acknowledging his severe mental illness. The prosecutor, however, remains intent on pursuing punishment, arguing that the severity of the neglect demands accountability regardless of intent. The story then shifts to the court of public opinion in the small town, where Ellie faces judgment for reporting the family, and ends on a hopeful note back at the hospital, where Ethan is recovering and bonding with his aunt. The summary highlights the central conflict between justice and mercy, and the complex reality that lies between criminal neglect and a tragic, misguided attempt at care. The story deepens as the characters process the aftermath. Ellie visits a recovering Ethan in the hospital, bringing him his sketchbook, which brings him joy. His aunt, Rebecca, thanks Ellie for saving his life. Their conversation reveals the full, tragic backstory. Todd adopted Ethan after his brother, James, Ethan's biological father, died by suicide following severe PTSD from their military service. This explains Todd's desperate, misguided attempt to protect Ethan from what he saw as the same bugs that took his brother. The situation becomes more medically complex when the doctor reveals Ethan has a secondary, neurological infection, Bartonellosis, likely transmitted by the lice, which requires extended hospitalization. The summary ends on a note of heightened anxiety, as this new complication echoes the very mental illness that destroyed Todd and James, raising fears about potential long-term effects on Ethan. The narrative underscores the theme of intergenerational trauma and the precarious nature of recovery. The story delves into the psychological and emotional aftermath of the crisis. Ellie and Rebecca discuss the possibility that Todd's paranoid delusions about bugs were a distorted, subconscious recognition of Ethan's real, Undiagnosed neurological infection, Bartonellosis. Ellie visits Todd at the psychiatric hospital. He is medicated and subdued, filled with guilt for nearly killing the nephew he adopted after his brother's suicide. Their conversation reveals a crucial, heartbreaking connection: Todd's mental breakdown and his desperate, misguided attempts to treat Ethan with homemade remedies were triggered by seeing the same symptoms in Ethan that preceded his own brother's decline and suicide. The narrative suggests that Todd was tragically reenacting his greatest trauma, trying and failing to save his nephew from the same bugs he believed destroyed his brother. The summary highlights the themes of inherited trauma, the blurred line between intuition and delusion, and the profound, tragic love at the core of Todd's actions. The story reaches a profound turning point. Ellie visits Todd in the psychiatric hospital, where medication has cleared his mind enough to have a coherent conversation. He reveals that Ethan's symptoms, headaches, fatigue, a buzzing sensation, began months ago, mirroring the symptoms his brother James experienced before his suicide. Todd's delusions about bugs were distorted, terrified recognition of a real, physical illness in his nephew. Ellie tells Todd that Ethan has a confirmed bacterial infection, Bartonellosis, that causes neurological symptoms, validating his fears while tragically highlighting his misguided response. Todd is consumed by guilt but finds a sliver of validation. He asks Ellie to deliver a heartfelt, coded apology to Ethan. The story ends with Ellie fulfilling this request, and Ethan displaying a heartbreaking maturity and understanding of his father's illness. The narrative confirms that Todd's actions, while dangerously neglectful, stemmed from a place of profound love and a traumatic attempt to prevent history from repeating itself. The summary emphasizes themes of misunderstood illness, the tragedy of misdiagnosed mental health, and the enduring bond between father and son. The story concludes with a hopeful, forward-looking resolution. 3 months later, Ethan is thriving in Vermont with his aunt, Rebecca. He is physically healed, emotionally recovering, and adjusting to a stable, loving home. He is processing his trauma with a therapist. The narrative highlights the slow, steady progress of both Ethan and his father, Todd, who is responding well to treatment in the psychiatric hospital. The final scene shows Ethan writing a letter to Ellie, symbolizing the enduring connection and gratitude between them. The story ends on a note of cautious optimism, emphasizing themes of healing, the power of a supportive community, and the long, difficult, but possible journey of recovery from trauma. The story concludes with a hopeful resolution. Todd's legal case is resolved with a plea agreement that prioritizes treatment over prison, sentencing him to continued psychiatric care and probation. This brings relief and closure to everyone involved. The narrative then jumps forward, showing the positive outcomes. Ellie has transformed her barber shop into a community mental health hub. Ethan is thriving in Vermont with his aunt, and Todd is making significant progress in treatment. The story ends with a powerful, full-circle moment. Ellie accompanies Ethan and Rebecca on a visit to the psychiatric hospital. The reunion with Todd is warm and positive, showing a healed, clear-minded man who is grateful. The final scene symbolizes forgiveness, healing, and the new, supportive family unit that has formed from the tragedy. The core themes are redemption, the power of community, and the possibility of recovery from even the deepest trauma. The story reaches its final, hopeful conclusion. The narrative culminates in a deeply emotional visit at the psychiatric hospital, where a much-improved Todd is able to have a normal, loving interaction with his son, Ethan. Todd expresses his gratitude and guilt to Ellie, who reassures him that his love for Ethan was his saving grace. The family is healing together, focusing on forgiveness and a future where Todd can rejoin them. The story ends by gently breaking the fourth wall, turning its gaze from the characters to you, the reader. It reflects on the broader, more profound themes woven through the narrative, the tragic failure of the very systems designed to support our veterans, leaving them to fight invisible battles long after the war is over. It highlights the transformative power of a single, observant, and compassionate individual, like Ellie, the neighbor who refused to look away, to alter the entire trajectory of a family teetering on the brink of collapse. Finally, it extends a quiet but urgent call to action. It asks us to consider the people in our own orbits, the quiet neighbor, the withdrawn coworker, the distant family member. It implores us to pay closer attention, to look beyond the surface, and to offer the simple, profound gift of kindness without being asked, for it was that single act, repeated by Ellie, that became a lifeline. The core message resonates with a quiet power that even in the face of immense personal tragedy and systemic failure, the human bonds of community, the courage to be vulnerable, and the unwavering force of compassion can forge a path toward healing. It is a reminder that we are not meant to heal alone, and that sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to see someone else's pain and choose to share its weight. That's all about our stories. Do you have any thoughts after hearing the story? Please share it in the comments below.